Section 24 of A Daughter of the Sioux. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Reading by Mary Rhodey. A Daughter of the Sioux by General Charles King. Chapter 24. The Death Song of the Sioux. That was a gruesome night at Frayne. Just at tattoo, the door leading to the little cell room had been thrown open, and the sergeant of the guard bade the prisoners come forth. All warriors of the Oglala band, and foremost of their number was Eagle Wing, the battle leader. Recaptured by Crabb and his men after a desperate flight and fight for liberty, he had apparently been planning ever since a second essay even more desperate. In sullen silence he had passed his days, showing no sign of recognition of any face among his guards until the morning Kennedy appeared. All malice forgotten now that his would-be slayer was a helpless prisoner, and therefore did the Irishman greet him jovially. "That man would knife you if he had half a chance," said the sergeant. "Watch out for him." "You bet I'll watch out," said Kennedy, never dreaming that, despite all search and vigilance, Moreau had managed to obtain and hide a knife. In silence they had shuffled forth into the corridor. The heavy portal swung behind them, confining the other two. Another door opened into the guard-room proper, where stood the big, red hot stove, and where waited the two blacksmiths with the irons. Once in the guard-room every window was barred, and members of the guard, 3 deep, blocked in eager curiosity the doorway leading to the outer air. In the corridor on one side stood 3 infantry soldiers with fixed bayonets, on the other, facing them, 3 others of the guard. Between them shuffled the Sioux, Wing leading. One glance at the waiting blacksmiths was enough. With the spring of a tiger he hurled himself, head foremost and bending low, straight at the open doorway, and split his way through the astonished guards like center rush at football, scattering them right and left, then darted round the corner of the guardhouse, agile as a cat. And there was Kennedy confronting him. One furious lunge he made with gleaming knife, then shot like an arrow straight for the southward bluff. It was bad judgment. He trusted to speed, to dim starlight, to bad aim, perhaps, but the little Irishman dropped on one knee, and the first bullet tore through the muscles of a stalwart arm. The second, better aimed, pierced the vitals. Then they were on him, men by the dozen, in another instant, as he staggered and fell there, impotent and writhing. They bore him to the cell again. The hospital was too far, and Waller and his aides came speedily to do all that surgery could accomplish, but he cursed them back. He raved at Ray, who entered leading poor, sobbing little Fawn Eyes, and demanded to be left alone with her. Waller went out to minister to Kennedy, bleeding fast, and the others looked to Ray for orders when the door was once more opened and Blake entered with Nanette. "By the general's order," said he, in brief explanation, and in an instant she was on her knees beside the dying Sioux. There and thus they left them. Waller said there was nothing to be done. The junior surgeon, Tracy, he whom she had so fascinated only those few weeks before, bent and whispered, "Call me if you need. I shall remain within hearing." But there came no call. At taps the door was once more softly opened, and Tracy peered within. Fawn Eyes, rocking to and fro, was sobbing in an abandonment of grief. Nanette, face downward, lay prone upon a stilled and lifeless heart. Flint and his escort duly went their way and spread their story as they camped at Laramie and the Chug. The general tarried another week at Frayne. There was still very much to keep him there, so not until he and Black Bill came down did we at other stations learn the facts. The general, as usual, had little to say. The colonel talked for both. A woeful time, it seems, they had had with poor Nanette when at last it became necessary to take her away from her dead brave. She raged and raved at even her pleading aunt. Defiant of them all, from the general down, and reckless of law or fact, she vowed it was all a conspiracy to murder Moreau in cold blood. They gave him the knife, she declared, although it later developed that she had tossed it through the open window. They had given him the chance to escape. The sight of Kennedy, who had striven to kill him twice before, and then of the blacksmiths, with their degrading shackles, all just to tempt him to make a dash for freedom, just as they had lured and murdered Crazy Horse. Crazy Horse, his brave kinsman, not 10 years before, then had placed a dead shot on the path to life and liberty. A man who killed him in cold blood, as deliberately planned. These were her accusations, and that story took strong hold in certain circles in the Far East, where love of truth inspired its widespread publication, but not its contradiction when the facts became known. The same conditions obtain today in dealing with affairs across the sea. Nanette said many other things before her final breakdown, and Hay and his sorrowing wife found their load of care far heaviest, for the strain of Indian blood, now known to all, had steeled the soul of the girl against the people at Fort Frayne, men and women both, against none so vehemently as those who would have shown her sympathy, none so malignantly as those who had suffered for her sake. This was especially true of Field. In the mad hope of getting justice, as she termed it, for the dead, she had demanded speech of the general, and in presence of Black Bill and the surgeon, he had given her a hearing. It proved fatal to her cause, for in her fury at what she termed the triumph of his foes, she lost all sense of right or reason, and declared that it was Field who had warned Stabber's band, and sent them fleeing to unite with Lame Wolf. Field, who took the traitors' horses and rode by night with Kennedy to warn them it was Webb's intention to surround the village at dawn and make prisoners of the men. It was Field, she said, who furnished the money Moreau needed to establish his claim to a gold mine in the Black Hills, the ownership of which would make them rich and repay Field a dozen times over. It was Field who sought to protect her kindred among the Sioux, in hopes, she said it boldly, of winning her. But the general had heard enough. The door was opened and Ray and Blake were ushered in. The former briefly told of the finding of her note in Field's room the night the adjutant was so mysteriously missing. The note itself was held forth by the inspector general, and she was asked if she cared to have it opened and read aloud. Her answer was that Field was a coward, a dastard to betray a woman who had trusted him. "Oh, he didn't," said Blake, dryly. "It was just the other way. He couldn't be induced to open his head, so his friends took a hand. You got word of the outbreak through your Indian followers. You wrote to Field and sent the note by Pete, bidding him join you at that godless hour, telling him that you would provide the horses, and that you must ride to Stabber's camp to see Moreau for the last time, as he was going at once to the Black Hills. You made Field believe he was your half-brother instead of what he was. You brought Moreau back to the post and took something, I can't say what, down to him from Mr. Hayes, he waiting for you on the flats below the Trader's Corral. You should have worn your moccasins as well as a divided skirt that night, instead of French-heeled bottines. The rest others can tell." The others were Kennedy and the recaptured, half-recalcitrant Pete. The latter turned state's evidence. Kennedy told how he had wandered down into the flats after the few drinks that made him think scornful of Sioux, of his encounter with Eagle Wing, his rescue by Field and a girl who spoke Sioux like a native. He thought it was little Fawn Eyes when he heard her speak, and until he heard this lady. Then he understood. He had been pledged to secrecy by the lieutenant, and never meant to tell a soul, but when he heard the lie the lady told about the lieutenant, it ended any promise. Then Pete, an abject, whining wretch, was ushered in, and his story, when dragged out by the roots, was worst of all. Poor Mrs. Hay! She had to hear it, for they sent for her. Somebody had to restrain Nanette. Pete said he had known Nanette long time, ever since baby. So had Crapaud. Yes, and they had known Eagle Wing, Moreau, always, knew his father and mother, knew Nanette's father and mother. But Black Bill interposed. "No need to go into these particulars as substantiating Mrs. Hay and himself," said he. "The lady knows perfectly well that I know all about her girlhood." So Pete returned to modern history. Eagle Wing, it seems, came riding often in from Stabber's camp to see Nanette by night, and "he was in heap trouble, always heap trouble, always want money." And one night she told Pete he must come with her, must never tell of it. She had money, she said, her own, in the trader's safe, but the door was too heavy, she couldn't open it, even though she had the key. She had opened the store by the back door, then came to him to help her with the rest. He pulled the safe door open, he said, and then she hunted and found 2 big letters and took them to the house, and next night she opened the store again, and he pulled open the safe and she put back the letters, and sent him to Mr. Field's back door with note, and then over to saddle Harney and Dan, and bring 'em out back way from stable. Then later she told him Captain Blake had Eagle Wing's buckskin pouch and letters, and they must get them or somebody would hang Eagle Wing, and she kept them going, all time going, meeting messengers from the Sioux camps or carrying letters. She fixed everything for the Sioux to come and capture Hay and the wagon, fixed everything, even to nearly murdering the sentry on number 6. Pete and Spotted Horse, a young brave of Stabber's band, had compassed that attempted rescue. She would have had them kill the sentry if need be, and the reason they didn't get Wing away was that she couldn't wait until the sentries had called off. They might even then have succeeded, only her pony broke away, and she clung to Eagle Wing's until he had to hit her to make her let go. The wild girl in a fury declared it false from end to end. The poor woman, weeping by her side, bowed her head and declared it doubtless true. Her story, Mrs. Hay's, was saddest of all. Her own father died when she was very, very young. He was a French Canadian trader and traveler who had left them fairly well to do. Next to her Indian mother, Mrs. Hay had loved no soul on earth as she had her pretty baby sister. The girls grew up together. The younger, petted and spoiled, fell in love with the handsome, reckless young French half-breed, Jean Lafleur, against all warnings became his wife, and was soon bullied, beaten and deserted. She lived but a little while, leaving to her more prosperous and level-headed sister, now wedded to Mr. Hay, their baby daughter, also named Nanette, and by her the worthy couple had done their very best. Perhaps it would have been wiser had they sent the child away from all association with the Sioux, but she had lived 8 years on the Laramie in daily contact with them, sharing the Indian sports and games, loving their free life, and rebelling furiously when finally taken east. She was the real reason why her aunt spent so many months of each succeeding year away from her husband and the frontier. One of the girl's playmates was a magnificent young savage, a son of Crow Killer, the famous chief. The father was killed the day of Crazy Horse's fierce assault on the starving force of General Crook at Slim Buttes in '76. And good, kind missionary people speedily saw promise in the lad, put him at school and strove to educate him. The rest they knew. Sometimes at Eastern schools, sometimes with Buffalo Bill, but generally out of money and into mischief, Eagle Wing went from one year to another, and Nanette, foolishly permitted to meet him again in the East, had become infatuated. All that art and education, wealth, travel, and luxury combined could do was done to wean her from her passionate adoration of this superb young savage. There is no fiercer, more intense devotion than that the Sioux girl gives the warrior who wins her love. She becomes his abject slave. She will labor, lie, steal, sin, suffer, die, gladly die for him, if only she believes herself loved in turn. And this did Nanette more than believe, and believing, slaved and studied between his irregular appearances that she might wheedle more money from her aunt to lavish on her brave. When discovered meeting him in secret and by night, she was locked in her third-story room and thought secure, until the day revealed her gone by way of the lightning rod. They had to resort to more stringent measures, but time and again she met him, undetected until too late, and when at last her education was declared complete, she had amazed her aunt by expressing willingness to go to Fort Frayne when the good woman thought the objectionable kinsman abroad with Buffalo Bill. Until too late, Mrs. Hay knew nothing of his having been discharged and of his preceding them to the West. Then Nanette begged her for more money, because he was in dreadful trouble. Had stabbed a police officer at Omaha, whose people, so Moreau said, agreed not to prosecute him if $1,000 could be paid at once. Hay's patience had been exhausted. He had firmly refused to contribute another cent to settle Moreau's scrapes, even though he was a distant kinsman of his wife, and they both were fond of his little sister's fawn eyes. It had never occurred to Mrs. Hay that Nan could steal from or plot against her benefactors, but that was before she dreamed that Nanette had become the Indian's wife. After that, anything might happen. If she could do that for love of Moreau, said she, there was nothing she could not do. And it would seem there was little short of deliberate murder she had not done for her Sioux lover, who had rewarded her utter self-sacrifice by a savage blow with the revolver butt. Poor Nanette, sobbed Mrs. Hay, and poor Nanette, said all Fort Frayne, their distrust of her buried and forgotten as she lay refusing herself to everyone, starving herself in dull, desperate misery in her lonely room. Even grim old Black Bill, whom she had recognized at once, Bill who had been the first to confirm Blake's suspicions as to her identity, had pity and compassion for her. "It's the way of the blood," said Blake. "She is bred out of that bloody strain that haunted us in our familiar paths." "She could do no different," said the general. "Having fixed her love on him, it's the strain of the Sioux. We call her conduct criminal, they call it sublime." And one night, while decision in Nanette's case was still pending, and still self-secluded, she hid within the trader's home, refusing speech with anyone but little Fawn Eyes, a sleighing party set out from Frayne for a spin by moonlight along the frozen Platte. Wagon bodies had been set on runners and piled with hay. The young people from Officers' Row, with the proper allowance of matrons and elders, were stowed therein, and tucked in robes and furs, Esther Dade among them, gentle and responsive as ever, yet still very silent. Field, in his deep mourning, went nowhere. He seemed humiliated beyond words by his connection with this most painful affair. Even the general failed to cheer and reassure him. He blamed himself for everything and shrank even from his friends. They saw the dim glow of the student lamp in his quarters as they jingled cheerily away. They were coming homeward toward 10 o'clock. The moon was shining brilliantly along the bold heights of the southern bank, and insensibly chat and laughter gradually ceased as they came again in sight of the twinkling lights of Frayne, and glanced aloft at a new-made scaffolding standing black against the sky at the crest of Fetterman Bluff. "Eagle Wing roosts high," said a thoughtless youngster. "The general'll let them have their way to the last. What's that?" he added with sudden stop. The sleigh had as suddenly been reined in. The driver, an Irish trooper, crossed himself, for on the hush of the breathless winter night there rose and fell, shrill, quavering, now high, now low, in mournful minor, a weird, desolate, despairing chant, the voice of a heart-broken woman, and one and all they knew at once it was Nanette, after the manner of her mother's people, alone on the lofty height, alone in the wintry wilderness, sobbing out her grief song to the sleeping winds, mourning to the last her lost, her passionately loved brave. Then all of a sudden it ceased. A black form started from under the scaffolding to the edge of the bluff. Then again, weird, wild, uncanny, a barbaric, almost savage strain burst from the lips of the girl. "Mother of Heaven!" cried the driver. "Can no one stop that awful Keene? It's her death song she's singing." Two young officers sprang from the sleigh, but at the instant another cry arose. Another form, this one of horse and rider, appeared at the crest, silhouetted with the girls against the stars. They saw the rider leap from saddle almost within arm's length of the singer, saw her quickly turn, as though for the first time aware of an intruder. Then the wailing song went out in sudden scream of mingled wrath, hatred, and despair, and, like the Sioux that she was at heart, the girl made one mad rush to reach the point of bluff where was a sheer descent of over 80 feet. A shriek of dread went up from the crowded sleigh, a cry of rejoicing as the intruder sprang and clasped her, preventing her reaching the precipice. But almost instantly followed a moan of anguish, for slipping at the crest, together, firmly linked, they came rolling, sliding, shooting down the steep incline of the frozen bluff, and brought up with the stunning force among the ice blocks, logs, and driftwood at the base. They bore them swiftly homeward, Field senseless and sorely shaken, Nanette's fierce spirit slowly drifting away from the bruised and broken tenement held there so pityingly in the arms of Esther Dade. Before the Christmas fires were lighted in the snowbound frontier fort, they had laid all that was mortal of the brave, deluded girl in the little cemetery of Fort Frayne, her solemn story closed on earth forever. End of chapter 24.